writing is a dynamically beautiful healing process and empowering process. So my advice is get to it today.
You are now listening to the podcast where authors inspire listeners to become authors, the Going North Podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer, best-selling author, and book enthusiast, DomBrightmon. And you're going to be listening to a different author that will inspire you to join the business of immortality, known as authorship. Now let the fun begin. Today's review highlight comes from Girls Love Trucks. That's what I'm talking about indeed. And they left a 5-star review titled, How to Truly Go North. I can appreciate that title already. If you want to create an accelerated life experience, Dom's podcast presents beautiful guests with extraordinary life experiences to move you along your true path more quickly. Dom is so enjoyable and accessible as a host with a fun sense of humor and enjoyable personality and a plethora of fascinating guests. Plethora is right because we are 700 plus episodes of counting. Well, thank you so much for leaving that 5-star review, Girl Love Trucks. Indeed, appreciate you. And if you too would like to leave your wonderful thoughts about what you like about the podcast, do so by heading over to goingnorthpodcast.com or do so via the Apple Podcasts app, formerly known as iTunes. And we will be sure to highlight it during a future episode. And speaking of a future episode, you probably know what I'm about to say next. Let's get on with today's episode. And today on the highlight reel builder for authors known as the Going North Podcast, we got another super special, awesome human for you today, courtesy of one of the best websites ever, podmatch.com, the wonderful site where podcast guests get to connect with podcast hosts. And today's guest is cooler than freaking, we'll go with 7 cucumbers. That's right, indeed, because 7's usually a lucky number. And folks like 7s. They like 3s too, but hey, 7 goes with heaven. At least it rhymes with heaven indeed, because today's guest, she has a heavenly voice and she is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author as well as a New York Times best-selling author. So best of both worlds, as well as a speaker, serial entrepreneur, and most of all, a humanitarian as well. So she loves helping out her fellow human beings. Let's give it up for the wonderful, brilliant, consistent, and beautiful Bridget Cook-Burch. How you doing today, Bridget?
Oh, doing so good. Happier to be here than you can even tell.
Oh, all right, cool. I'm glad the joy is mutual then.
Yeah, I'm going to throw you off from time to time, so you better be watching.
Darn, took off my watch when I got home before the interview. Darn. I guess my wrists aren't watching.
Yes, they're not. I'll watch for you. How's that?
Oh, sweet. All right, cool. That's what I'm talking about indeed. And you've probably read a bunch of books before becoming immortalized in the business of immortality. So that means you got a good pair of eyes. So I'm looking forward to it. You got my back then.
Got your back.
That's right, indeed. Well, speaking of back, there's always some backstories behind the front page of resumes and cornfields of experience, even though you have a better crop than corn. Corn is just corny. I'm sure there's more exciting crops out there like magical books and trees and cherries and berries. So my goodness, mind filling in any cavities I may have missed that involve you becoming the Bridget that you are today?
Well, one of the things I would tell you is in my early 20s, I had a near-death experience that completely changed my life. And it completely changed the story I was telling myself and the story that I was telling myself about humankind. And it enabled me to be able to go out. My clients call me the book whisperer, but I was able to go out into the world and really see people for who they are. And also the importance of stories in the world, how we see ourselves, the stories we tell about ourselves, and the transformation that can happen when we shift those. And a lot of times writing a book is going to do that as well. So that's where the magic really started for me, and it just continues to maintain its course, and I love it.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. My goodness, so one of those near-death experiences. My goodness, so I'm guessing you saw heaven, or was it another crazy vision? What did you see?
I actually had a person come into my room who told me I was being given a second chance at life. And just remarkable, unforgettable, filled with so much unconditional love. Like every cell in my body was vibrating, and the metal table in my hospital room was vibrating, and it was just amazing. At one point, I was like looking down on my body as it's vibrating, and other times it was just like I just was amazed, but very overcome by the love. And it was needed because what got me into the hospital in the first place was just feeling like I wasn't enough. I was working 3 jobs, going to college, trying to get, everything in alignment, really, wanting success and failing miserably at a lot of things, friendships, relationships, school, and not doing well in finances. And this unconditional love was like a tidal wave. And it completely changed, like I said, my perspective. And I was given a second chance at life. I had a couple nurses outside in the corridor saying she's not going to make it until morning. And I knew it. And I knew I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. So, in being given a second chance, I haven't taken it for granted. I still make a hell of a lot of mistakes. And, who knows where I'm destined for. But I will tell you this, I just feel like God has extraordinary belief in humankind. And so do I.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. And that's huge too, definitely huge too, because nowadays folks will be like, especially nowadays, it's like, man, let's not underestimate human stupidity here. We might be our own worst.
I would agree. And I think storytelling plays a big role in that, that we're telling some pretty stupid stories to each other. We're also telling some beautiful stories, like, some of your podcast guests and what they're into to improve life and to head north and to make sure that their North Stars are really on point and that they're achieving better levels of things on their own terms. I think that's wonderful because there are a lot that are being led astray by stupid stories, and you can see the results. And I think it's wonderful when people go, maybe I don't have to believe that about myself, my economic situation, the politics, my body. I can actually create a beautiful and incredible life. And they start telling themselves a different story. Psychologically and energetically, things can really shift. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of crazy stuff going on out there, but we can create something amazing.
Wow. Well, speaking of creating something amazing, you help a lot of folks jump over to the other side in terms of immortality with getting the stories out onto paper and for folks to devour, whether it's through their eyes or through their ears, if they're in audio form too. So, what led you to that discovery where you discovered your love of writing and you're helping others to write their wonderful books and even become bestsellers, no less, like legitimate bestsellers?
Yeah, in fact, that's very important to me because there's a lot of programs and different things that will assist someone to tell a story, get an expensive business card out there, But oftentimes people will become really embarrassed about what's sitting on their shelves, or they have, 2,000 or 10,000 books in their basement and they're not proud of it. And I feel like books and stories have the power to change the world. So, number one, we got to believe in it. And number two, we get to write as though we believe it. And, it's about telling the truth, but it's also about telling an epic story and our most glorious truth in a way that it's raw and real and vulnerable and transformational. And so I got started in a couple of unusual circumstances. So, I told you about my near death experience, but I was an avid reader. And I was always interested in stories, especially like I started reading from about the age of 3. And by the time I was in the 3rd grade, I'd read out our library, our bookmobile, the school library. But I was very, very intrigued by books that had to do with amazing stories and social causes. So everything from Uncle Tom's Cabin to Kill a Mockingbird to The Diary of Anne Frank, there were these things that had an indelible impression upon me as a kid. And when I had the opportunity to start writing stories, they had created a foundation for me where it's like, books can be incredible tools if they're good and done. And I had the opportunity to work with some gang kids in Denver, and it was called the Summer of Violence. There were teachers that were being murdered. There was all kinds of things that were going on with gangs because they had this blood in, blood out mentality. And there was a lot going on with Nuestra Familia, the Bloods, the Crips, and they were having to spill blood in order to get into the gangs, and then they weren't allowed to get out. So blood out meant you don't get out, until you die. And these were some of the kids that I got to work with. These were some of the kids that I got to explore their stories and see what were the stories they were telling themselves. And then how was it that some of them would do this 180-degree turnaround in the opposite direction? I saw some of them become extraordinary leaders of other kids, get out of gangs, refuse to do some of the dirty work of gang leaders, be influential to their parents, grandmas, grandpas, aunts, and uncles that were gang members. It was so inspiring to me. And so then we moved out of state, and I wanted to bring some of that openness that I had felt. So I started working on a fictional novel. And the crazy thing was, in doing research, I'd had a dream where I had character scenes and plots and even eye color. And then I come to find out that the hero of my story was real. So everything I wrote about in my fictional novel and what TJ Leiden had talked about in his on his website were in tandem. And then he said, by the way, I'm looking for someone to write my life story. And call me. And I didn't know how to react, but I could tell everything was in some divine order. It was crazy and wonderful. So after a time, we developed a relationship, and that was my first book. And I didn't know a heck of a lot of what I was doing in the beginning, but that book has still saved a lot of lives. It's called Skinhead Confessions: From Hate to Hope. And so here he was, this kid that grows up in Redlands, California, and creates all kinds of chaos and hell, and introduces kids to come into the gangs and things like that. He's a major recruiter for Western Hammerskin Nations, one of the biggest skinhead movements on the planet. And then he became a dad. And all of a sudden, his priorities quietly started to change. And he didn't want his kids to grow up to be, stupid, ignorant, not educated. He wanted them to have wonderful lives of contribution, not of destruction. And so he ended up changing his life, had a price tag on his head and websites that said terminate on site, $3 million. It was pretty crazy. And that book is still saving lives, and it's still getting some kids and some people out of prison. It's an amazing book. Wasn't my best, but it's an amazing book, and it got me started on a path. So then I started writing more extreme stories. So these are not true crime, but they're actually transformational in nature. And so I wrote about that former skinhead, like I was telling you about. I wrote about the daughter of a serial killer. His name was the Keith Hunter Jesperson, and he was the happy face serial killer. And I wrote that with Melissa Moore, and she transformed in front of my eyes. This power of your book on paper. It was the coolest thing. And she's now a producer in LA, and she's creating all kinds of amazing things. And then I wrote a book called The Witness Wore Red. That's the one that hit New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and was amazing in its trajectory too. Rebecca Musser, who was able to put Warren Jeffs, the prophet pedophile, behind bars for life plus 20 years. And I was telling you, my most recent project is called Divine Turbulence. And that's with Gary Lee Price, who is the sculptor of the Statue of Responsibility. And when Gary was a little boy, he faced something really horrific as this little kid. And he lost his mom and his stepfather in murder-suicide. And then he was put from the frying pan into this fiery torment of abuse of all kinds and enslavement. And at one point, he had to decide if he was going to become really bitter for it or if he was going to become better. And he found God and art. And when he found those two things, his life just exploded for the positive, to the point that he's now fulfilling Dr. Viktor Frankl's dream of a statue of responsibility on our West Coast. Because Dr. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and 3 of the Nazi concentration camps of the Third Reich, he said the United States needs to have a statue of responsibility because you cannot have liberty without responsibility. And so, Dom, in our lifetime, we're going to be seeing that statue on the West Coast, and there's some really exciting plans in the works for it right now. So it is meant to be. There's going to be a 35-foot one, and then it's meant to be 350 feet tall, at least as tall as the Statue of Liberty, and it's about one hand reaching down to lift another. So I know I go on and on because I get all excited and passionate, but this is why I believe that books and stories can change the world, because I've seen it happen. I get to work with extraordinary authors every day, and these authors come from various backgrounds and walks of life, from housewives and house dads, all the way through corporate leaders, artists, Olympic skiers, all of these different things, you name it. And I'm able to see again and again the heroes and sheroes journey being put out on paper and really changing people's lives. So just like you experience with your book, and like you like to talk to other authors, it's like there's a reason that we're so passionate about putting things out on paper, because in audible format too, so we can listen to it if we want, but that the words and the way that we present information and stories, it's what we've done since the dawn of time. Now we can do it even more effectively, and it really can change people's lives.
Woohoo! That's right, indeed. And not just by nickelback style or quarterback style could change the world and change lives. Indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. And that's a nice, beautiful win streak and a nice, wonderful array of books that you've helped to put out into the world. And that TJ one, the first one, indeed, sounds like a little gift of prophecy. And that one, we had the dream, and it's like, oh, it's actually real. Oh, hello, it's the real person. Oh, I'm actually writing it for real. And it's like, so my goodness. So has that ever happened for any of the books that other books that have went out? You had a dream before the you actually had the opportunity to work with that author, or any future of the projects where you had a dream that you're writing the book and it actually happened?
I'm not like that, but I have had a dream that I'm putting into fictional format, which when I get that done, because it'll be a series, then I'll be happy to come back and share that with you. So I've had this one other dream, and yeah, I just can't take it for granted. It's like, girl, you had the dream, you better do something about it. The other ones have had other miraculous situations and circumstances. And so, just they've come to me in different ways. But it's interesting because I never sought them out, even though I wanted to express something beautifully. I heard this quote from Mother Teresa, who said, "I am the pen in the hand of a God who is writing a love letter to the world." And that's the kind of stories that I write, from the darkness and the hell that sometimes people go through to the absolute light of transformation on the other side, and people who are now using things that happen to them for them, and they're now choosing to become leaders or be leaders and masters and help people to find a better way of living. So just like you, just like what you do.
Ah, there we go. Me like you, indeed. That's right, indeed. You love to see it because folks are be definitely needing that help out there, indeed. So, what's the process like? Because it's like, is it like a tag team effort of you just, I guess, in a way, whispering the good stuff to them, like, hey, why don't you adjust this here? Like, is it like a whole editing process, or they just give you the raw details through interview format and you just write the story for them?
I do the whole gamut. So I select a couple of projects per year that are really influential, that I think are going to make major shifts in society and positive social change. But the rest of the time, I really want people to know that they have the ability to write. And so I put on these inspired writers retreats, always up, in the mountains or somewhere beautiful in nature. And we go through a really deep dive process, often asking questions and working on solutions that people can write for 10 years and they didn't know to ask. And we have experiential exercises that really create a robust, juicy richness to your writing that you'll never forget, because you can't get this in a classroom. It's very experiential. And we also help people overcome the three biggest fears that keep most people stuck. So either afraid of their visibility or afraid of how to put it together on page. They're muddled and confused, and there's such a big mess that it's not going anywhere. And then we also get over imposter syndrome, because we recognize, you can remain stuck, but you're not going to reach people. And if you have a mighty message, then it's time to get it out there, because, we just never know how long we have.
Ah, that's true indeed. That's true indeed. My goodness, as you mentioned this retreat, and I'm not sure if this has actually happened before, but I kind of doubt it's happened. But has anyone like showed you their work and you're like, man, we need to partner up here? And then it's like they win the whole kid and caboodle, like the winner, like they all compete like it's a tournament, or better, like one of those bad reality TV shows where they're all trying to date the same person. It's like, oh, they're trying to write a book with Bridget. If they show the best story to Bridget and eventually becomes a bestseller. Has that been a idea for you down the road, or has that happened where it's like, oh, this is a one heck of a great story?
Oh, I've had two. Gary was one, the sculptor. He came to the retreat with his wife because she has an incredible book inside of her. And when Gary was expressing his story, I'm like, Gary, holy cow, my friend, you have got to get this out. And I was so inspired that I knew, he deserved to do this. And then he became inspired to ask me if I would assist. And then I have a book coming out. We're getting ready to take it to New York for agents, and it's called Angel in Arlington. It's about a young lady whose father is murdered aboard a naval vessel, and
Yeah.
nobody's telling the truth. So she has to
Mm.
face the US Navy. She has to face her father's killer. She has to find unlikely courage to be able to discern the truth and to be able to do something about it. And so that's an extraordinary story that I can't wait to get out. So both of those came to me in the form of, events or retreats, but I don't have anybody like knocking down doors. I'm not that famous. I'm good at making other people famous.
It's all good. It just popped in my head, like, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I love New York, or like whatever. I think the Brett Michael show from like 2005. It's like, like everybody's going for the same person. It's like, hey, winner gets to write a book with Bridget, become a legend. She does most of the work for you. She makes you famous. She'll be a New York Times bestseller for real.
Oh, it's so much fun. And I love co-authoring because I really get to know people and to love them. I become their biggest fans. But I also, I get to coach and teach and train a lot of authors and speakers out in the world to recognize, wow, I do have a story that's worth telling and worth telling well. My whole premise is, if you're going to fillet yourself like a fish out on paper, you might as well make it a legacy. Might as well be something that 50 years from now, it's still transforming lives. And so I love being able to do this work with all walks of life. And even if it's not a project that I necessarily select to co-author, it is definitely, I fall in love with these people's stories and celebrate whenever they get theirs published. Like, you can believe it. I'm calling high heaven and telling everybody about it.
Ah, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's a real coach right there. A real coach and encourager and a trainer, indeed. That's right, indeed. She's got your back. That's right, indeed. She's got your back like a cape, y'all. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. So, my goodness, so since you coach folks, what's probably been the biggest lesson you learned from coaching others?
I have learned that to never judge another human being. That old saying, it's a Native American saying, but to never judge another person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. or their moccasins. And I got to tell you, whenever I've had a judgment, God will bring me a story and the person behind the story, and all of my judgments flee. Because once you understand where someone comes from, then you understand the decisions that they make. You understand, why they've done what they've done and what their come from is. And so you might not agree with it. You might have a completely and totally different perspective. And I hope you do. I hope you always have your own original perspective. But suddenly there is this beautiful openness that happens. Like I remember when my second book came out on Oprah and Dr. Phil and CNN with Melissa Moore, and there were people who were furious at first because they're like, she's capitalizing on her father's murders. And what she really was doing was bringing healing. And the most incredible miracles, Dom, that I saw happen was when the victims' families of her father's crimes, when they read her story, all of a sudden, all of the judgments fell away, all of the walls fell down, all of the anger and the hatred that they'd been carrying for her, they suddenly understood her. And then they got more insight. And actually, Melissa has brought that same compassion to true crime in LA and Hollywood. And she's had several shows that bring together victims and the families of serial killers and things like that. Never been done in Hollywood before, to have this kind of compassion in true crime. And she's been a real leader. So these miraculous things continue to happen with storytelling, as you know. You've experienced the same thing. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah, definitely indeed, definitely indeed, and compassion, something we definitely all need in this lifetime, especially now more than ever, where folks have lost patience. Like patience is almost nil these days with a lot of folks when you go out into the public, whether it's driving or just random transactions going around in retail areas. It's definitely a different area where compassion is definitely necessary.
Yes. And as you know, what's beautiful too, like, you can have a movie, you can have a podcast, you can have these beautiful things where you get to dive deeper, which is great. In books, there is something that you can do that no other art form can, and that's to give inner dialogue and inner motivation, inner processing and thoughts. You can try to show that in a movie, but you can't really tell the whole story. And in a book, you can. So there's still this amazing magic that can happen with that, and I love that ability. So when people choose to be educated, they choose to open their perspectives, they choose to learn about other people and be fascinated, they choose to really expand their point of view. Compassion naturally comes, and I think in today's really quick society, of these little tiny sound bites that sometimes mean things and sometimes mean things, and so nothing, and it's all about, how many likes or followers can I get, how many viewers on this thing. We're not getting the full stories anymore. So books play, I think, an extraordinary role and will continue to.
Oh, yes, ma'am, indeed. They will continue indeed. Because it's so true. Like, there's so many things you can put in the book that you're not going to catch in a movie. Like, you only got 2 hours. And of course, like, yeah, maybe you can go 3 or 4 hours, but how many folks are really going to sit through a 3, 4 hour movie unless it's something huge like a superhero movie or something like that? So it's like, yeah, books definitely can touch you in a lot deeper ways and more special ways than other mediums can indeed. And it's a powerful magic indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. So, my goodness. So, speaking of magic, I've heard you probably turn the magic of setbacks into success. So, what would you consider one of your biggest setbacks that actually set you up for success?
Hmm. I've had a lot of them. The good news is I really, really try to learn from my mistakes. But I've definitely made my mistakes. I think that's one of the glories of the Inspired Writers Retreat is, I teach people to set them up for success, but I also teach them about failures. I have stories after stories of my failures and what other people have taught me, so I can teach people what to watch for, what not to do, as well as what to do. So that's a wonderful thing. I would say, how you've heard of writer's block. Um, I don't experience that very much, but I remember, when my second book came out on Oprah, and it's this national bestseller, and she's going out on television shows, and we're seeing the book on TV, and there's all of these amazing things happen. And then, I have some other stories that come along equally as powerful, but perhaps, they may not end up doing as well. I found that it was easy for me to kind of shut down. It was, like, what if this isn't good enough? Or what if it doesn't do as well as this? Will this be the end of my career? All of the imposter syndrome thoughts that hit all of us at different times in our careers. And Rebecca Musser taught me this really exquisitely beautiful thing. And it was what she called better done than perfect. And we knew that her book would be used in courtrooms, it would be used in law schools, it could be used for therapy. We also knew that it could very well dismantle an organized crime unit in the name of God, and it did. Unfortunately, now there's 100 little Warren Jeffs running around trying to do some of the same controlling, horrific behavior as he did. But this whole culture of oppression was able to start dismantling because of the power of that book. And it was Rebecca telling me, better done than perfect. Like, she wanted it exquisite, and she wanted it true and as truthful as she was in that courtroom every time she testified, more than 20 times in a court of law, to be able to stand up to these people that had control and power over her life and that of 10,000 other people for so long. And yet it was the better done than perfect that got the book out and was able to make these changes. And so that would be probably the thing that really propelled me forward, is better done than perfect. And at one point, the artist has to put down the paintbrush. The painting needs to be done. The sculpture gets to be finished. The book gets to go to editing, right? We just all get to do that at some point.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. You're so right. Better done than perfect is right. Because there's so much out there where folks are trying to have that quote unquote perfection, that good old completeness, when it's like, hey, books truly are complete, to be honest, when you think about it. Because it's like there's so many multiple editions that may come out afterwards once you get that book out. It's like, oh, maybe I could add this. And then, of course, you got the wonderful 10th anniversary editions, 25th anniversary editions. If they still sell for years on end, then you just add more content. And then, if depending on the story or depending on the author, they'll grow too. And then they'll probably get sick of reading the old book. It's like, let me say it this way. Let me chisel this marble a little better this time.
There you go. Yep. There can always be a second edition, a third edition, that's for sure.
Yes, ma'am, indeed. Yes, ma'am, indeed. So, my goodness, so with the better done than perfect, your canvas is far from over yourself. You got plenty of more paintings to put out there metaphorically into the world, and plenty of marble to chisel through. So, what are you excited about over the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, so many good things. A couple of them I can't talk about because they're going to be huge reveals. There's going to be a lot of media. There's going to be a lot of social change that we're looking forward to. So a couple of these I just can't talk about, but I'm excited for Angel in Arlington to get into the right publisher's hands. I'm excited for When God Has More Faith Than You and Your Doctors, which is being published through our Inspired Legacy Publishing indie imprint that we have. I'm excited for the writers retreat coming up the first weekend in October, and see, I always get like the most beautiful array of authors, all in different stages, all doing something different in the world, coming together in a beautiful cabin on the lake. And, we have a personal chef that will take care of everybody's food, and she takes care of the dishes and everything. And we just work on story all weekend long. And that always excites me to see who gets drawn together. we've had Native Americans, we've had Canadians, we've had Australians, we've had folks from the UK, we've had people from all, I shouldn't say all the states, but from most of the United States that come together for an extraordinary weekend, and then they become each other's best friend, number one fan, and help each other along the road to publication. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I love it. It's been called Life Transforming and Book Transforming, and that just makes my heart sing. So I love that. And yeah. Oh, and I'm going to be speaking. We had talked about near-death experiences. I'm going to be speaking in Washington, D.C. over Labor Day for the International Association of Near-Death Studies. Their annual convention will be in that area. And so I get to do a writer's workshop there. And it's for people who've had near-death experiences, sacred spiritual experiences, and shared death experiences where someone has come back from the other side to give them a message or to talk with them or share with them. And so sometimes people get afraid to talk about these really tender and sacred experiences. But one thing that's been discovered is that the more people hear about these, read about these, the level of anxiety goes down, the level of purpose goes up, the level of joy goes up, because we recognize like this sometimes really crappy existence that we might be facing, post-COVID with some of the things, the politics and the fighting against one another, that there are people rooting for us on the other side, and that they're rooting for us to do something here while we have life. And they're also excited to greet us on the other side. And so anyway, I'm super excited to teach a workshop at that as well. It's going to be a great year.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So that means folks need to leave apples on your metaphorical desk.
That's right. I will take a metaphorical apple on a metaphorical desk, and I'm really excited to meet more people with extraordinary stories.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. Well, speaking of extraordinary stories, you're a fellow believer, so I always invite Christians to share the salvation testimony here on Going North. So, my goodness, so what's yours?
Well, I was telling you about my near-death experience, right? And what I will share with you is that the presence that filled my room with so much unconditional love was Jesus, and totally rocked my world. To go from hearing nurses saying you're not going to make it till morning to having such a loving, powerful, beautiful presence saying you're being given a second chance at life. And I'll tell you what, Dom, before that happened, I was so sad because I knew I was dying, and I knew I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. I just knew I hadn't. All the jobs I'd worked, all the schooling that I was struggling with, relationships, I just knew that whatever I came here to do, I hadn't done it. And I wasn't doing it well, but I didn't know how to do it better. And that experience, that unconditional love, is what I seek to foster amongst my writers, amongst my friends, family, the human beings that I love to be around. And I think I told you, God has ultimate faith in humankind, and he's just hanging out, seeing what it is that we're going to create with all the glory we've been given, with all this gorgeous creation. So my testimony, but also my invitation is, what are you going to do with this extraordinary life? How are you going to fulfill the measure of your creation? And that would be a great question for anyone to ask themselves.
Hashtag eloquence, indeed, fulfilling the measure of your creation. I love it. That's right, indeed. It's probably the best, best description of potential ever.
There you go.
Yes, indeed. Because she's like, shoot, I'm in my 20s. I ain't even get started yet for real. It's like, come on. Survived 3 foster homes, darn it. Like, come on.
Well, you got stories.
Oh, yeah. Magical stories. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's freaking amazing. So my goodness, so since you've been on so many interviews promoting the good work that you're doing and work that your authors are putting out, my goodness, is there a question that you wish folks would ask you more often when you're being interviewed on these podcasts?
Yeah, I think so. I think a good question for anyone to ask is, how could I get my book done without having to spend 5 or 10 years on it? And I think that's a question they should ask. And I know navigating the waters online can be really crazy. So you're, you're wanting to find a good coach, you look for someone you're going to resonate with, that, that like that you could be inspired by, that has walked the talk, with the bursting of online businesses. Sometimes people are like, oh, that's a good moneymaker, oh, that's a good moneymaker, but doesn't mean that it moves their blood, doesn't mean that they're passionate about it, doesn't mean that they're passionate about helping you. So ask the best questions, become as knowledgeable as you can. But I would also say this, and I think it resonates with your audience, and I think it would resonate with you as well, is that, we're filled with more and more and more and more information. And, Dr. Wayne Dyer at one time, he asked his audience, would you rather be full of information or inspiration? And for me, my success has come in being of service to others and being open to inspiration. And I have got to cut a lot of current learning curves by following those two things. And so, but especially the inspiration over information. I like to get better at what I do every single day. But the inspiration has often led me to people, circumstances, stories, situations that I never would have found if all I was locked into was that, mental, oh my gosh, the trying to navigate those online waters. So listen to your intuition, ask to be guided. There is a big force out there that wants the best for you. That, you've heard that, I know the plans I have for you, right? To prosper you. And this is what I believe is out there for us. We just get to ask.
That's what I'm talking about. We definitely get to ask indeed. So it sounds like if you want to avoid 5 to 10 years of sitting on your book, or just not even sitting on it, just having it in your head, just metaphorically bake cookies with no oven mitts, it's like you got to get around some inspiration.
Oh, use that one. My friend Dom said big cookies with no oven mitts. There we go.
Yes. Writer's block is burning your hand, basically.
Yep.
It's like, there's supposed to be chocolate chip. It's supposed to feel chipper. Ah.
I love how you crack yourself up. It's contagious.
Hey, well, shoot, I'm hilarious, shoot. Like, hey, feeling chipper, chocolate chip, trying to bake cookies without onion mitts, it's oven mitts. It's like, shoot, burning yourself all the time. It's like, yep, going through the trap door of downloading lead magnets and then getting to the online coaching programs, a bunch of them, and then eventually signing up for 50, and then maybe taking one, and then maybe you get around to 3 out of the other 50, and then you maybe get a chapter done, and then, oh, darn, you try to grab the cookies again. Oh, he didn't get to chapter 2. It was only chapter 1.5. Yeah. Yeah, it
Mm.
can be a wild, wild west out there. You need more than a cowboy hat and some boots when you're out there in the world trying to write your book, especially going online.
I agree. Especially when you're trying to cowgirl up or cowboy up. It's like, oh, yeah, but it might be headed in the precisely wrong direction.
That's right, indeed. So, speaking of west side of the wonderful US of A, where there's more desert and probably more cacti that might prick you, any cacti folks need to avoid when it comes to writing their book?
I would say yes. Number one is don't allow your fear to dictate your output. Recognize it's hard for anyone. 9 out of 10 adults want to write a book and they think they have something worth being in a book, but less than 3% ever get it done. And so just that better done than perfect, begin the process and don't allow your fear to dictate it. Like, just enjoy the journey. There's so much that people can learn about themselves and about the world in the writing process. And Dom, you might know about this, but there's been some recent studies that have been done on when you're writing in your journal, when you're writing about your own story, when you're taking the time to reflect upon past events, especially in today's world. There's so much complex PTSD and people operating in the amygdala of their brain and the fight and flight response. But it's very cool that the writing process of even the hard stuff, it relieves the triggers in the brain. It takes experiences from that fight or flight response into a different part of the brain that actually processes more objectively and can take away the pain and the triggers as effectively as EMDR. And it allows for you to have a more understandable life, a more enjoyable life, a more compassionate life and self-view. And when we have that, we're more able to turn around and be a gift and a contribution to others in the world and to serve other people. So writing is a dynamically beautiful healing process and empowering process. So my advice is get to it today.
Woohoo! Well, you heard the coach, y'all. Get to it today, indeed. That's right, indeed. Get to it today, indeed. That's right. She's got her camouflage on with her cadet hat, y'all. That's right, indeed. She took off the cowgirl hat and got into sergeant mode. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed.
Ooh, I have a very inappropriate joke, but I won't say it. So
Yeah, this is the part where Eggy, you want to say, go ahead and say it, but okay, I'll let you slide with this one.
okay, we'll slide with this one. Okay.
Well, speaking of sliding into this one, folks need to slide some wonderful, wonderful nutrition into their wonderful bodies to keep them going. And my goodness, I can also go Divine Turbulence at the time of this recording, since the other two aren't officially out yet. So, Divine Turbulence, that book, if it were a food, what would it be and why?
If it were a mood,
Well, a food.
oh, a food, a delicious food. Now we're on the same page. Ooh, I would call that actually a smorgasbord because, you get some of the bitter and the sweet. You get real meat, not just milk, but there's also nuances of gravies and of sauces and of chutneys and wonderful other things that, if you drink wine, you could pair it with. It's just that delicious.
There you go, folks. That's right, indeed. A whole smorgasbord, indeed. That's right, indeed. Don't need to count calories. That's a divine turbulence. That's right, indeed. If you try to count your calories, they disappear. That's the turbulence.
That's right. No fat, no calories is like the chocolate, but but you feel good because you've got the food in your belly before you start feasting on the chocolate.
That's right, indeed. Unless you're one of those weird people who likes to eat dessert first, right?
I've been known to do that a time or two.
I knew you were my kind of people.
That's right. You and I, Dom, we could have a chocolate fest. That's for sure.
Oh, we could have a chocolate fest indeed. Only problem is I might eat my own hand.
Oh my goodness. We'll try to avoid that.
Yeah, exactly. I really wouldn't be chipper then. That'll be another hit to the stove, or should I say the oven, without my mitts.
He's trying to eat his own hand.
Oh man. Well, speaking of not eating your own hand is a piece of advice for coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive. And that is, if you're to wake up tomorrow and you are 25 again, but you're still in the current year, what advice would you give to yourself?
I would say live it with gratitude. Like gratitude is the great multiplier. That's what I would tell myself. Gratitude is the great multiplier, and anything that you are so grateful for, you are inviting more of into your space.
Ah, there you go, y'all. That's right indeed. Gratitude, one of the big G's. It ain't the biggest G, but it's one of the big G's. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. It ain't the biggest G, the G-O-D, but it's one of the under G's itself. That's right indeed. Still one of those capitals, y'all. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Don't worry, there's no W in that G though. There's no Washington in that G.
Oh, you are having too much fun today.
I blame you for that one.
All right, then. Still accused and guilty.
That means you're guilty of a good thing, and folks need to be joining you in terms of being guilty of success because you're going to help them to do just that. So, for those need to keep in contact with you and all the stuff that you're doing, Bridget, what's the best way for folks to do so?
The best way is to reach out on my website, which is yourinspiredstory.com. You can also find me at inspiredwritersretreat.com, and you can find me the Book Whisperer on Instagram and the brand new Threads.
Okay, there you go. That's right indeed. It's funny. It's actually kind of funny now. It's like a whole bunch of things came together. It's like that good old Bible verse, 2 Timothy 3:16, where it's like, hey, all the words in the good old scripture is given by God. That's right indeed. It's like God breathed. And it's like, hey, you're the book whisperer. So you're breathing some inspiration into people, just like the good big man upstairs. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Blessed by God to bless others. So if you need the book whisperer to breathe some life into you, inspire you to get over that hump, get to the finish line, and finally hit that publish button, she's got you covered like a blanket, my friends. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Bridget's got blankets, so she's used them to cover you, metaphorically. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. So that way, when winter comes, known as distraction, she's got you covered, y'all. That's right indeed. You won't even have to worry about the oven anymore without the mitts. You'll have a whole wood burning stove full of logs. That's right. That's right.
And the chocolate chip cookies, both.
That's right. You'll file a field chipper too. You'll have your oven mitts.
There you go.
Well, before we go on a rabbit hole about red marks and bunny ears, any parting words before we close up shop, Bridget?
Probably this, because you mentioned Second Timothy, and one of my favorite scriptures of all times is 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. Whenever you get into fear, if you remember that, what would love do here? What would wisdom do here? What would power do here? You're going to be on the right track with your writing and with your book.
If you're hearing this part of the episode, that means you're one cool individual. Thanks a bunch for tuning in, and if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to share it with at least one other person in your network. Bonus points for 3. And be sure to check out the backlog too while you're at it, because there are hundreds of wonderful episodes to choose from as well.